Welcome to another episode of Destination Linux Podcast.
Welcome to episode 67. I'm Raka, and with me, joining me this week is Ryan, Zeb, and Michael. And along with him is Martin Wimpress, somebody everybody should know about. Welcome, Martin.
Hello. Thank you for welcoming me back on your show again.
Well, you were here in episode 15, I believe it was.
Yep.
Almost, I guess it was over a year ago.
It's almost a year to the day.
And it was our single most popular YouTube video out there.
Yeah, you hold the record.
Get in your face, Ike Doherty.
All right, so everybody should know you, but for those that don't, you are the project lead for Ubuntu Mate.
Yep.
You're the community manager and the core developer for the Mate desktop.
Yes.
You work as a maintainer for the packages. And besides being a regular in the Linux Unplugged podcast Mumble Room, you're also a co-presenter on the Ubuntu podcast.
I am.
So, the first question has to be, now, you've met Ryan, right?
We are acquainted.
We are acquainted. Okay, so did you really tell Ryan to RTFM?
Yeah.
And how good did that really feel?
Well, you see, the thing is it should feel better than probably you're portraying it. But the fact of the matter is, nobody reads the documentation.
See, Rocco, nobody reads the manual.
Notes. So Ryan is in good company there of the vast majority of people. So yeah, Ryan did ask me a couple of questions, and I politely answered them, and then also directed him to the documentation.
So you basically told him to RTFM.
Documentation in Ubuntu Mate now, right? Because we've got Ubuntu Mate Welcome, which is where I directed Ryan. And since 1710, we've had the Ubuntu Mate Guide, and that's authored by Larry Bushy, and that's a doc that's built into the OS. And then Larry has also written two books. He's written a book about migrating from Windows and Mac OS to Ubuntu Mate, and another book that's a complete guide to everything to do with Ubuntu Mate and all the default applications that we ship. So there is no shortage of documentation. What there is a shortage of is people that's prepared to sit down and read it.
Well, in fairness now, the most documentation in distros is horrible. But when I went to the documentation for Mate, it was fantastic, and actually not only answered the questions that I had, but gave you the exact keys that you need to utilize, the ways to change it. Like, it was all encompassed there. But usually I think a lot of people probably avoid the documents because they're so bad. But you guys have done all this work to make them so great, and people still just assume, like, I'm not going to read that thing because the other distros don't do it.
Yeah,
well.
It makes sense. In this case, the RTFM is read the fantastic manual.
There you go. That's what you meant, right, Martin, when you said that with that emojicon with the middle fingers up?
That's exactly what I meant.
Okay, got it.
So, we mentioned that you were on the episode 15 back in April 2017. So it's been a year since you were in here, almost. What have you been up to in the past year that you'd like what Ubuntu Mate, not specific just Ubuntu Mate, but anything?
Well, so Ubuntu Mate does occupy the vast majority of my spare time. Anyone that's involved in a distribution will be able to tell you it's just a massive time sink. So most of my spare time, that's where it goes. But at work, I switched roles. So I think last time I was here, I was on the Ubuntu desktop team, and I'm now in the Snapcraft team. So that was a personal change for me. And then in terms of sort of geeking out with other Linux nerds, other than the four of you, I've been to Linux Fest Northwest, Boss Talk Live in London last year, OggCamp in Canterbury in the UK last year, and I went to UbuCon Europe in Paris, and then a couple of Canonical events as well. So I've been fortunate that I've been able to travel around and meet sort of members of the Linux community sort of face to face at the various events.
Nice.
And then in October last year, so as we were wrapping up what was the end of the 1710 release, Alan Pope introduced me to Rust, the game.
Oh, yes.
a whole month of my life just got invested in playing Rust. So I did a whole wipe of Rust. And as a result, I ended up with a gaming mouse and a specially adapted keyboard for my right hand.
Yes, I love
and
it.
a mouse called Bungee and a whole load of additional paraphernalia in order that I was better at this game. Yeah.
So did you all create your own server on Rust, or did you just join one of the public servers?
Yeah, no, there's there's the Gaming on Linux community. They run a number of online servers, and one is a Rust server, and we play there. Nice. So it's relatively small. There's probably, well, at that time there was a maximum of about 50 or so people, and they've got a Discord channel. So literally at lunch breaks and as soon as I finished work in the evening, logged on to Discord, logged on to Rust, and then had a chat with all the Linux nerds on the Gaming on Linux server, and then shot them in the face with bows and arrows and things.
Well, these guys are going to Self in a few months. So what is your favorite to go to?
Oh, wow. That's really tough. I enjoy them all. I think I enjoy them all for the same reason, and that's that you're among people that speak your language. You know, you're among people that understand what Linux is, and you don't have to go through that. Well, it's kind of like, you know, Windows and Mac OS. You know, everyone has got the same, you know, the same level of understanding, and you all just want to talk about the thing that you're passionate about. So it doesn't matter. You know, I've been to them in America now and all across Europe and in the UK, and that's a consistent thing. And I like them all for different reasons.
So why is the American ones the best ones?
Well, I've only been to one American one, and it wasn't the best one. It was a good one. So they're all different events, right? Linux Fest Northwest is much, much bigger than any of the other events I've been to, and I think that's sort of an Americanism right there. You know, it has to be bigger than everything else.
Pretty much.
Naturally.
Yeah. But I really enjoy OggCamp. That's quite a small event, and that grew up from the Linux podcasting scene in the UK. So I really enjoy that one. And then the other one that I'm really starting to love, in fact, I do love it, it's UbuCon Europe, and I'm going to my third one of those. In fact, I'm going next week. I will be doing the release of Ubuntu Marte from UbuCon. And I really like that one because now I've got a good band of friends from across Europe, and I get to see them, you know, maybe once or twice a year at one of these events. And it's as much a social event as it is, you know, getting up and giving talks and listening to talks from other people. It's a real nice mix of tech and geekery and just hanging out and having some beers with your friends. So I can't wait to get back to the next UbuCon.
Superb. Just a quick one. I noticed you mentioned a couple of those in the UK. Is there like a list of things, events that happen for the UK?
Well, the Ubuntu podcast, we did used to do lots of, you know, trying to keep a track of the various events, but it was a lot of work. The big corporate-y ones, yes, those tend to be on Lanyard and opensource.com and things like that. But kind of these things you have to know about. I mean, one that I've never been to that I want to go to in the UK is Wuthering Bytes up in the north. And that's it's a week-long event. And each day has a different theme. And that always looks really interesting. You just have to know about these things. Are you going to be coming to OggCamp?
If I knew where it was and when it was, then yeah, I could be.
Right, okay. Well, oggcamp.org, and you'll find all the details. It's in August this year, I believe. And where is it? It's somewhere in the north. I forget where it is. I've booked my ticket. I'm going, but I forget where it is. But OggCamp is a great event. Really good fun.
Okay, I'll have a look at that. Thank you.
Yeah. And also closer to where you are, FOSS Talk Live in London in June. That's where all the Linux and open source podcasters get together, and we have an afternoon stroke evening of doing shows in air quotes, where we get on stage and you know, do a dog and pony show for half an hour each, whilst consuming, you know, beer and eating pub food. So it's in the cellar of a pub in London. That's a really good fun event as well.
And try to be on the first group of doing the show. So you don't have to do all the beer.
Last year, Mark and I were doing a competition, and neither of us knew what each other was doing. And Popey had set this whole competition up, and I realised I'd had too many beers because I couldn't remember anything about my program that I'd written somewhere there. And I'm like, well, I just can't remember how this works. I wrote it 4 weeks ago.
Well, OggCamp
Yeah,
seems to be Saturday and Sunday, August 18th and 19th in Sheffield.
Yes, Sheffield. There we go. That's where it is. Yes, Sheffield Hallam University, I think it is. Yeah.
So during this year, you've obviously done, as you said, a lot of work on Marte and over the previous years. What are some of your favorites that you've brought to the masses with the Marte desktop?
Well, I suppose Ubuntu Marte itself, it's got weird origins, and everyone knows the origin story of how that started with Popey and I. What some people don't realize is that I had made a Marte desktop OS based on Arch just a few months previous to starting Ubuntu Marte. And I made that as a demo for a presentation that we gave at FOSDEM in 2014. And that was the first time in a long time I'd actually stitched together a desktop operating system of my own. Mm-hmm. So in the week that I hurriedly knocked that together, I learned quite a lot. And so when it came to actually making Ubuntu Marte, it eased the path. But the reason that I was making this thing on Arch is that the then leader of upstream Marte said he wanted Marte OS, like this standout reference version of the best that Marte could be, so that we could showcase. Mm-hmm. And that's what this live CD was that I made based on Arch. And I suppose that idea stuck with me. And when I started making Ubuntu Marte, it was like, this has to be like the best version of the Marte desktop. So consequently, it's not a pure implementation of the Marte desktop. I have broadened the scope of what we do and some of the technologies we use in order to make it better.
Right.
Do you keep the originals of these programs that you had? Do you still have them that you could boot them up?
I've got a feeling that live ISO for Arch may be on the martedesktop.org website still, but that's 4 years old. So it's probably based on Marte 1.6 or 1.8,
wow.
But it's out there. Yeah, I think it's still on the website. I think so.
Very cool. So you started your Linux journey with distros like Crux, Slackware. You played with Red Hat, Fedora, obviously developing Mate, which you were playing in Arch for a while. So based on this, we know now that you've not found the cure for distro hopping, because you at least at some point were a distro hopper.
I'll get to that. Go on.
So when you're developing Mate, though, do you look at other people's work, such as, distro hopping at all, to look at what they're doing in different distributions or desktop environments to say, hey, that's a really good idea. I think I'm going to take some of that.
Yeah. So first of all, I've never really been a distro hopper. You can list off lots of distros that I've used, but then again, I've been using Linux for 24 years now. So, I've had a lot of time to stick with all of those distros for some years at a time.
Gotcha.
So I've, with the exception of Fedora, which I only used for 6 months, all of them have been a multi-year stints that I've had with each of those distros. And the absolute cure for distro hopping is make your own distro.
That makes sense.
That solves that problem. Yeah. But in terms of, I watch people reviewing distros on YouTube to get a sense of what the distros are doing, which is good and bad, because a lot of the people that review distros don't dig into things very deeply, and it's all a bit sort of surface level stuff, and they're not aware of all of the nuances and things that are going on in distros. But you can get a sense for what's going on, and I get some tips from that. I run a lot of distros in VMs for work, so I've got distros of all of the distros that you could think up off in your head in the next 10 seconds. I've got VMs of all of those, and I use those on almost a daily basis.
Hannah Montana Linux?
Sorry?
Hannah Montana Linux included in there?
Well, that is the first VM I boot every morning.
And then followed immediately by Rebecca Black.
When we're testing Snapcraft on all of the distros, we start with Hannah Montana Linux and then OpenSUSE, and then we work up to the more popular distributions.
I love it.
Or down from the most popular, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about Ubuntu Marte specifically. What are some of the improvements that you're most excited for the users to see?
Oh, wow. What, for 1804?
Yeah, 1804, yeah.
So some of it sounds like stuff you've seen before, but it's been a long time sort of bringing it all together. But if you look at all of the layouts that we have now, and in particular the Mutiny layout, and actually doing Mutiny right, that it is sort of a really close approximation to what Unity 7 offered, that has triggered off just a ton of work in lots of different places. From simple things, what you would imagine are simple things like super key support. So binding something to the super key, lots of things can do that. But what you'll find is as soon as you bind something to just the super key, then you can't use the super key in any other shortcut combinations because that super key has been swallowed by whatever you've bound it to. So in order to pass that event through the whole stack, we had to touch the window manager, the settings daemon, brisk menu needed customization, the Marte menu needed it, the Marte doc applet needed it, the HUD needed it. There was a whole bunch of stuff where just managing using modifier keys as action keys was a ton of work. And it's like nothing that you would ever appreciate as an end user, but there was 6 months of work just doing that. And then, we need improvements to the global menu to do the global menus right. Global menus now support, Firefox and Mozilla and LibreOffice. They all implement their own menu models differently from how, the rest of the desktop toolkits do. And then we, have Qt support and obviously GTK support. So having global menus that work across all of those toolkits in the same way that they do with Unity, that was a ton of work. In 1804, we've added a new feature, which is window applets. And what this now means is when you're in like the Mutiny or the netbook layout, when you maximize a window now, it removes the window controls completely, and it then positions the maximize, minimize, and close buttons in the panel. So it gives you that ability to maximize the amount of screen space you're using.
Nice.
That was a change.
That's one of my favorite things about Unity.
In order, because, we did 1710 and we were like, this is really great. And then the first feedback was, well, when I maximize windows, and it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then indicators, we're using what people will recognize as the Ubuntu indicators now throughout. So they're default and on by default in all of the layouts now. And then things like the Marte doc applet. That's now got super key switching, just like Unity. So you have your panel bits down the side, and you can do super 1 to foreground or launch the first icon in the panel, or super 2 to do the second. It's icon matching as well. So it now uses the BAMF library. So it does better icon matching, because it used to be a best guess as to which icon it would display for an application. And sometimes you'd have Firefox open and then the icon attributed to it was for some random application. So we fixed all of that stuff. So, those are really cool stuff in terms of the layouts. They're all really authentic now, I think. My feeling is anyway. But then the real killer feature, and this is not going to be super relevant for a lot of people today, but I think over the lifetime of this LTS, it will become more relevant, and that's the high DPI support that we have now. Yeah. I think that is a standout feature. I think we've done a really bang-up job in the implementation.
Auto detection is nice.
Yeah, it's auto detection all the way through. I mean, the level of detail that we've gone to here. Not that you see it for very long these days, but you'll be familiar with the Plymouth bootloader. We get the logos.
Yep.
That's high DPI aware. The display manager, the thing that you log on with, that's high DPI aware. The desktop is high DPI aware. So automatically all of those things do the right thing when they're on a high DPI display. Even down to the X cursors. So the icons for the mouse pointer and all the rest of it, they're high DPI aware with high DPI scale factors. So we've really gone into that a lot. And because we're realistic about how people use their computers, when we detect that high DPI is available, we pass through the hints to Qt to tell Qt you're in a scaled environment now. So consequently, when you start VLC or Kdenlive or OBS in Marte in a high DPI environment, those applications have been passed the correct scaling hints. And in Ubuntu Marte, we also pass through all of the toolkit integration. So all of those applications look like any other application on the desktop. They're all seamlessly integrated. And I think that's a little bit of thoughtfulness and a bit of polish that some people should just be taking for granted, and people that have been around for a while in the Linux community will go, that's nice. That just worked. I didn't have to fit around with that. So, yeah.
Well, that's certainly one of the things that jumped out at me because I've got a high DPI monitor, and I open up XFCE and I've got this mouse cursor that's like that size. I opened up Marte and I've got this nice little normal sized cursor, and it, as you say, it just works. So tiny little feature, but obviously an awful lot of work that's gone into the background.
Yeah. Well, I would even say it's a major feature because you have new people. I mean, Linux is getting more and more popular, and at what scale we don't know, but we know it's getting more popular. You can just feel it in the amount of people interested in it. And as they are taking their newer machines and going with their latest stuff from Windows to Linux, if they've got a big cursor this big when they boot into Linux, they're going to be like, okay, why do people use this again? So for new users, this is a huge thing that when they install, their distribution, they've got Mate, they're going to have this experience like they would have on other operating systems they may be coming from. It's super important in keep not only bringing people to Linux, but also keeping them there because they're not going to spend the time to play with that, or as Martin would tell them, to RTFM.
always read the fine manual.
Well, in Mate Tweak, there's a toggle for high DPI mode between auto detection and regular scaling and force scaling. What exactly is that for?
It's for Linus Torvalds. he has famously rejected the whole idea of pixel doubling and pixel scaling. He's absolutely incandescent that you would buy this thing with massive resolution and then pixel double everything and then destroy the resolution. So that's there for Linus. When he wants to unlock the full resolution of his display on his XPS 13. But it has practical value. You may want to do it.
I really hope it says that in the manual. This is just for Linus.
I'll make sure we add that now. For Linus Torvalds.
Brilliant.
Well, going back to the layouts, the default layout now has been changed. So you're now running with the one called Familiar. And that's a change. How was that change taken? And why? Why would you change it?
Right. Okay. So this is something that a lot of people have been asking for. And it's also something that personally I've been wanting to get to. When Ubuntu Mate 16.04 came out, it solved the problem that I had at the time, which was my family were wanting a Linux distribution that was familiar to them, having used Linux for many years, and they were rejecting, all the modern stuff like Unity 7 and GNOME 3. So that was fine, but I found it still clunky and cumbersome to use. So I wanted to bring some modern touches to the Mate desktop. And Ike created the brisk menu, and through some collaboration there, we've been able to add the features that I felt were necessary to sort of refine that. So Familiar is basically very simple. It is the traditional layout, the 2-panel layout that everyone recognizes from Ubuntu Mate, but the applications places system goes away and brisk menu gets dropped in instead. And that is literally the only change. So it's like, in terms of the layout, it's 4 lines of code. That's the change that's present. A lot of people through, when they look at the different social feedback in, Facebook and Google Plus and Twitter and our own community, lots of people were asking for, super key menu activation by default. And we tried to solve that in 16.04 by bundling Synapse, but that was a control space activation. It wasn't. And also people coming to Linux from other platforms, they just expect super key to do something. Yeah. So that was really why I wanted to do it. It's been extremely well received. By and large, people are very happy with it. But of course, some people, I've moved people's cheese for some people, and they're not happy about it. There's a couple of people in the Ubuntu Mate community who've been very vocal about this change. Then they were not happy with the change, but the traditional layout is still there. It's still in Mate Tweak. It's a couple of clicks away, and if that's how you want to use your computer and, you know, muscle memory over many years of using your computer that way, then it's there and you can carry on just as before. But I think as a defaults are king. This is a better default.
I agree.
Particularly people that are, I think for this 1804 release, there's going to be a lot of people who have been using Unity for many years, but that option's gone away. People that have been using GNOME or have tried GNOME, and maybe it's not for them, have tried other operating systems where SuperKey is the way to go. I think this is the time where people are going to be trying this version out, and that is a button that has to do what people expect it to do.
Mm-hmm. I actually, I would have gone a little farther with the Pantheon interface, like or the Cupertino layout. Yeah. But I think the familiar is a nice compromise for the people who want the traditional, but also some more modern features.
Yeah. So I did make a case to the community about using Pantheon as the default. And we had a lot of backwards and forwards about that, and it was clear. But that's actually pretty much what I use. I use a version of the layout that I've slightly customized. I have Plank, I have Brisk. I have Brisk with the Dash launcher now, so that's another change in 1804. If you enable the Mutiny layout or the Cupertino layout and you bring up the menu, you now get this Dash overlay style rather than the drop-down menu. And I much prefer that, especially on the laptop, because it's a touch-friendly thing, and I've got touch displays, so I can just whiz through and bob on the screen. It's quite nice.
Very cool.
So the one thing we overlook, that there are users still on Mate 1604 yet. So they're just now getting these, or just will be getting these if they upgrade to 1804, the new changes in Mate 1.20.1. Mm-hmm. So we talked about a couple of them, like high DPI, and the way I feel about it is high DPI is not, it's not nothing I would use, but it's something that has to be there in order for it to be looked at as a operating system that everybody could use. You just mentioned the Brisk menu having that launcher style dashboard. That is absolutely awesome. I gotta say. So the welcome screen is also got some changes to it. So you got new animations, you got new transitions, and you got a new browser selection for your web browser.
Yeah. So Welcome and Boutique are kind of interesting because they've sort of been on hiatus for about a year now. Because in order to get the desktop where I wanted to get it, I really had to focus all of my time and energy on all of those details that we discussed earlier. There's a lot of moving parts there, and it has been a year-long journey to really sort of integrate all of that. So Welcome is effectively the old version, because we've got a new version in development, which nobody has seen yet.
Wow.
And is lots better. So what you're looking at is kind of like the old version with a few tweaks and nuances added and what have you. So we have browser selection. I think that's important because choice of browser is a very personal thing, and there are half a dozen high-profile browsers that you could be using, and they should all be presented to you. So that's a button now. You can fat finger that, choose the browser that you want, and set it as default all through one place in Welcome. We've sped up the animations and things, mostly because they're cool, they're nice looking, but they used to be a bit like, if you're using Welcome a lot, it's like, oh, I've got to wait. It's like a game with like FMV video in the middle of it. It's like, I don't want to see the man running. Get on with the damn game. So we've made all of those animations a lot more snappy and fluid. So that's another change. We've revamped everything that's in the store. So we've removed some things and tidied some things up. And actually, as we record this, there is another new feature, which no one will have seen yet. And that's that we've hooked up the integration with the telemetry reports that Ubuntu can now do. So that if you've done a fresh install or an upgrade, Welcome will now detect that you have a telemetry report available and prompt you to either submit or not submit that to the project. Nice. And that will be extremely useful to us for making decisions about, what hardware and platform support we want to invest in, and, what GPU devices are generally used, all sorts of stuff like that.
You're going to have to keep an eye on the Destination Linux Telegram group, because once this episode hits, we have a lot of distro hoppers that follow us. Everyone in mass is going to be hitting up Mate as soon as this episode releases. That seems to be what happens when we have guests. So you'll probably get a lot of interesting feedback. But two things that I absolutely was interested in enhancements was quarter window tiling, which is the window tiling was what you told me to RTFM about, which is very well done and handled within Mate. I can run a window tiler just as my desktop. In fact, that's kind of a preference of mine. It's just that I love the way they work. But with Mate, you guys have a lot of those shortcut keys in. You can do the tiling that you could with the window manager, but still have that beauty and ease of use of a regular desktop environment. And the second was the Mate terminal supporting background images. Now, this sounds like something, like putting, like playing Barbie dress up or something. Like, who would need that? But actually, it becomes super important to have background images for, when you're doing things like multiple SSHs into different terminals and being able to be able to recognize different terminals from each other when you are connecting to multiple machines and those type of things. So background images becomes more than just adding flair or putting a logo in the background. It actually allows you to differentiate between what you're connecting to. Yeah, those two features stood out.
It's fascinating, right? This background images thing. I wish I'd never put it in the release notes. So
I love it and you hate it. Man.
No. Marte Terminal has done it forever. But somewhere in the transition from GTK2 to GTK3, we were using one of the libraries incorrectly, and that feature stopped working for a couple of releases, and we fixed it. And I just happened to put it in the headline summary of stuff that was new, as it now does background images. And I should have put again, but I didn't. So we were just fixing a regression there. So
you could put now it works.
Yeah, now it works again. Yeah. But also you strike on a good point, because I used to use them exactly like that for colorized terminals for user context and location context, the system I was logging into. And I've also heard from people in our community who are visually impaired. They use these high contrast backgrounds to actually help them distinguish the text. So they use background images in that way as well.
Nice.
The hardware acceleration that you've now got in the Marco window manager, how difficult is it to work with Intel and AMD and NVIDIA to work out what you can utilize and how you can put it in there? And who's the easiest to work with, do you think?
So the advantage that we have with Intel and AMD now is they're both open source drivers, and they both use Dry 3 and KMS. So they're all in the kernel, and they're all using all of the modern kernel features. So they just work. The acceleration that's available in Marco just works with Intel and AMD right now. It's all done. And it also works with the Nouveau open source drivers. And then the NVIDIA proprietary drivers use Dry 2 and not so much. And this is the problem that, everyone has. So if you turn on if you install the NVIDIA proprietary drivers, as I have here, then go into the NVIDIA settings and turn on the full compositing pipeline, and that's all good then. But there is no easy one click or automated solution for integrating with the NVIDIA stuff. Maybe one day we'll see them more closely align. And I know they've had this aspiration, and the kernel team have basically denied them some of the access that they've wanted to integrate with a kernel level to make this easier. So it's kind of difficult for them, but yeah, maybe one day.
But so we also talked about earlier about the HUD, the new support for the HUD. I want to talk about that because one of my favorite features in Unity is the HUD. Absolutely.
Right.
Like I as soon as they announced it, I immediately jumped onto it and used it for a very long time. And the way you do it in Mate or Ubuntu Mate is really interesting. So instead of doing like a global HUD, it's an individual application HUD. And what made you decide wanted to switch to that style? And how much do you think that they compare to each other, the HUD from Unity and the one in Mutiny?
Well, so the HUD works is now an option in Mate Tweak, so you can tick a box and you can turn it on in any layout. As it happens, it works best when you've got the global menu enabled. It's a technical thing. and post-release, something that I hope to address so it works seamlessly everywhere. It works really well when you've got the global menu activated, and it works most of the time in most places when you don't. So that's something I want to resolve. Now, we experimented with, originally, we mimicked, had it at the top, global thing, but I've got multiple displays. And I'm on this screen here looking at this terminal, and then I Alt, and suddenly the the HUD appears on a different screen in a different location, and your whole context changes. So I noticed it then. It's not such an issue when you're on a laptop or a single screen, but as soon as I saw that, I was like, hang on a minute, this is wrong. So I tinkered with it. And basically the whole premise is now you're in the application. That's where your focus is. So when you hit Alt to bring up the HUD, you don't have to switch. You don't have to look elsewhere. You're still focused on the same application in the same place. So it's all about just, keeping you concentrated on the thing that you're doing. In terms of their functionality and how you search for them, I think we have a slightly better search algorithm for finding what you want out of the menus really quickly. It uses Levinson search algorithm, so it's really good for picking things out the list there. But other than that, they're functionally equivalent. And like just about everything else, that is high DPI aware now. So when you bring that up on a high DPI screen, that scales correctly. And we also did some work that it interrogates the theme that's running, and it automatically restyles itself based on the color attributes from your currently running theme. So as you switch themes around, it will re-theme itself dynamically.
I love it.
It's one of those things that once you've used it, you're like, how did I manage without this? Especially like when I'm editing the podcast in Audacity, I can never remember where the damn filters are that we need. And you just mash Alt and you start typing silence, and then you just find everything you need so much quicker.
Yep.
Excellent. Two of the other things that were really good for me about the 1804 release, and I'm just wondering where it came from, is you now get NVENC support out of the box as soon as you install the NVIDIA drivers. And OBS, you no longer have to add the PPA. So was that a community thing that you noticed, or did it come from other directions?
This is the benefit of being based on top of Debian. Both of those things were enabled through Debian's current developments, and they automatically get synced into Ubuntu. I think there are people that are... So OBS is very popular, and I think that was kind of a niche application, but it's just generally popular. It's amazing, actually.
Yeah.
And
it's got so many uses that a lot of people don't even realize how much it could be used.
Exactly. I think this is it. People think, it's for streaming, but actually when you use it, I think it's a better screen recorder than, simple screen recorder and things like that. It's a really versatile tool. So yeah, we've got these new versions of FFmpeg, and NVENC is there available. So as long as you've got FFmpeg installed and you've got the NVIDIA drivers installed, then that hooks itself up automatically. And then OBS automatically interrogates FFmpeg to see if NVENC is an available thing, and you automatically see that pop up as the default option now. So yeah, that said, OBS have a snap and a PPA. So, in a couple of months' time, when what's in the archive is no longer the latest version of OBS, you'll be able to get a newer version of OBS through either of those alternatives as well.
Nice. So Ubuntu and all the flavors in 1804 now come with a new feature called minimal installation.
Yep.
So how much space or time does that save somebody when they're installing? And what would you say are the notable programs that you won't get installed by choosing that minimalist?
So I don't think Ubuntu can take advantage of this feature because of the way their seeds are constructed. They have no recommended packages. So I think if you choose minimal on Ubuntu, it won't do anything. I've looked at minimal on Ubuntu proper, and obviously I did the implementation for Ubuntu Marte. I think the implementation in Ubuntu is basically to remove things that you might not want in an enterprise environment. So it basically removes games and audio players, and it removes the Office suite because, you know, a lot of people these days, they're using cloud-based Office solutions. With Ubuntu Mate, I'd been wanting to do something like this for a long time. 2 or 3 years ago, I did some work with the Ubuntu team, and we were creating this concept of Ubuntu Mate base and Ubuntu base, which was basically an alternative ISO which had fewer applications in it. That was just like the minimal system. So Ubuntu have been trailblazing with this for some time. They've had the Ubuntu core images, which are their community maintained images that strip out all of this stuff. And I'd wanted to do this for such a long time. So when I saw this capability coming along, I think the day it landed, I'd added support for it.
Nice.
On Ubuntu Mate, it removes everything that isn't the Mate experience. So Thunderbird, the Office suite, the video player, the audio players, the CD writer, a load of extensions in the file manager, a load of additional utility. It's all gone. So you basically get the Ubuntu Mate desktop and Firefox. And that's it.
Nice.
In terms of how much disk space it saves, I don't think that that's really the intention here, because those things surprisingly don't take up all that much space. You're talking a few hundred megabytes of on disk space at the end of the day. And actually probably takes a bit longer to install the minimal version, because the way it works is you actually install the whole thing and then at the end remove a bunch of stuff. That's how the installer works in Ubuntu. You get the squashfs file system that is the OS, gets deposited on your disk, and then what used to happen is the installer, for example, would be removed. You know, there was a bunch of packages at the end that would get removed. So the installer and any language packs that weren't the language you chose at install time get removed at the end. So what's happened is this has been bolted on the end of that process, where as a distro maintainer, I can now say, here's a list of packages we don't want in the minimal install. And at the end, it then yanks all of those off as well.
Right.
We've gone quite deep on that. We've done a whole load of reverse dependency analysis. So when you remove Rhythmbox, there's actually a whole bunch of additional stuff that's associated with the Rhythmbox package that this minimal installer won't automatically reverse resolve and remove. So we've manually done that. So we yank like everything. So when you remove LibreOffice, every trace of LibreOffice and all of the libraries that it depends on are also removed from the system.
Very nice.
And I think this is great. I think that for my own purposes, I will always install the minimal version now, because I never use LibreOffice. I rarely use transmission. The only thing I really use that's in the default install is VLC, but you know, that's just an additional thing I can install on top these days. And I do need the browser. But where I think it will really become useful, and not just for Ubuntu Mate, but generally, is people that are making their own Steam boxes or their own Kodi boxes and just want a base that, you know, gives them the means for all of the driver support that they need and can, you know, get all the drivers that they want. It's all working, and then they can just stick on top, you know, the application that they want or the applications that they want. I think it will be very popular.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of potential for like a kiosk mode and stuff like that.
Yeah. These sort of set-top box style devices. Yeah.
I pretty much in the same boat. I'm going to be using the minimal pretty much every single time I use it now.
Yeah.
So a quick question that's just popped into my mind, and you'll have to forgive me because I'm not the techie in the group. I'm just an end user. Putting the minimal on and having all of these patches stripped out, does that make it run leaner and quicker and slicker, or is there no real difference? No
significant difference, because, for example, it doesn't remove any of the accessibility software. So all of us here, as far as I can tell, there are 4 of us wearing glasses. That will be the older gentleman amongst the crowd here. But as far as I can tell, we can all see just perfectly fine. But we all pay a tax when you install Ubuntu Mate that it's set up and ready for any visually impaired user to turn on all of those features. That's all there. It's installed. It's all configured. And some of those services are always running in the background. So you're paying a little bit of a tax there. And I don't remove that stuff in the minimal install because I firmly believe that just in the same way that the operating system should be translated and available to them regardless of what language they speak. It should be available to them regardless of their physical ability as well.
Mhm.
I agree.
So I don't remove things like that. And it's those things, things like accessibility integration and all of the stuff that when you plug your phone in, that automatically connects. There's a whole bunch of additional services running there to facilitate that, which are rarely utilized. There are things like that in Ubuntu Marte that people say, oh, well, it's getting bloated because now it uses 380 meg and it used to use 320 meg. That stuff I leave in there because when people expect it to work, it does just work, as opposed to you having to go and install a bunch of random packages to make it go.
Yeah, and also it's more important that they have an easier entry to using it, because you remove those for the minimal, and then they want to remove the other things, and they also have to deal with that. It would just be like that would be
unless you're the guy who only has a computer with 340 megabytes of RAM.
Yeah.
Well,
because there's a lot of those.
In which case, buy a Raspberry Pi. You can solve it.
Exactly.
Yeah, but that goes back to what Mate's thing is, that everybody, it pops in their mind as soon as you mention Ubuntu Mate, it just works. And that goes back to you having those services in there. So yeah, I agree that they shouldn't be removed.
Yeah. So consequently, to answer your question, Zeb, no, none of the things that get removed, I don't think any of them have background services or twos at all. So I don't think you'll see any drop in memory footprint, and the disk footprint drop is it's hundreds of megabytes. It's not going to make a difference. It's really about creating a platform you can build on and customize yourself.
Well, even though in the Telegram group we have a lot of distro hoppers, we have a lot of feedback for Ubuntu Mate being that distribution that just works. It's a very popular one. And we got a question from Barb, who is one of your biggest fans.
Yeah, I know Barbara. Hello, Barbara. I'm sure you're watching.
Okay, so she wants to know if you can now, or maybe if in the future there would be a feature to be able to set a different wallpaper for each workspace.
RTFM, Barbara.
Oh boy, if only it were that simple. The best way to achieve that right now is in the software boutique. There is an application called Variety, which is a wallpaper switching tool, and that can do that thing, displaying different background images on different displays. So that's the way to do it today. It's interesting, right? So this is one of those bits of feedback that you don't necessarily need to get directly, but I just know this is a feature that people want to see. In the same way, it used to irk people that when they set a background image on their desktop and they locked the screen, that wasn't the image that was on the screen locker, which we fixed a couple of versions ago. It's a real simple thing, but this displaying different images on different displays, I have heard that from hundreds and hundreds of people. We'll get to that,
How hard is something simple like that? Because I mean, obviously, it's just a nice to have. Is that a ridiculous coding undertaking, or is it just you got to find time for it?
Yeah, you got to remember, there's only like a handful of people working on this stuff, and by and large, we want to work on the things that interest us.
Right.
And there's an element of, I tell you what, if there's anyone listening to this who's familiar with C and GTK, come in, give us a pull request. We'll merge it immediately, and it'll be in the next release. So it's just priorities. When you're faced with everything you could do, and then the things that you've got time to do, it's just one of those things. It's not on the critical path.
Plus, there's an alternative there you can use, like Variety, like you're saying. And Variety is very popular in window managers because there's no background service unless you have Variety going. So, I mean, it's something that's very popular. It's maintained. It's out there. There is a solution for it, basically.
Exactly. And there's another thing as well. I forget the name of it, but there's another tool that people say, yeah. Well, actually, it's not this, but it's a tool like that you can do the same thing.
Well, Variety works on different displays, but I don't know if it works on workspaces, like actual different workspaces.
Oh, workspaces. Oh, goodness. Oh, well, I will have to scope this out now.
Wow. I just reread that question myself. It's for different workspaces.
Wow. Goodness. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, everything's possible, right? Yeah.
We're talking your biggest fan, Martin. You need to put some time.
I know.
But there's obviously less people asking for workspaces than they are monitors.
Yeah.
Yes, actually, this is the first time, maybe the second time I've heard about workspace context backgrounds as opposed to display orient.
Right.
So, yeah.
So in like i3 and others, you can put an icon above each workspace, which you can set, which will tell you, hey, this is a different workspace. Like you can put a little mini browser icon or whatever to know this workspace for my browsers or whatever. That would seem to me to be almost more useful than having a different wallpaper on every workspace. But I can see.
There's actually, it's interesting because this is like a situation where people want to have different modifications, and there are other DEs that you can't have the same one on the like if you can have literally the same wallpaper on each monitor, or you can change it to different workspaces, but then there's like limitations where you can't like say have like a dual monitor wallpaper that just kind of splits. Whereas with my testing with Mate, you just put that, you say, it's a dual monitor, split it up for me. And depending on your configurations, there are some times where one DE does one thing perfectly and then another person doing something completely different, and you're trying to like cover all of the bases. Like there's so many options to go with. Like, there's gonna be a lot of time to develop all of these different things.
Plus, you got to support them. It'll end up like the terminal background images. We'll get back around to fixing that later.
Well, there is that, right? So the other thing is, of course, is that with high DPI, that was tricky because I was the only person on the team with a high DPI display. So that was all on me until I found another developer in the Mate community who'd recently purchased an XPS 15 and was also significantly more skilled than me with regards to the inner workings of the X stack. So he did all of that work. But then as this got really close, then other members of the core team were like, I'm going to buy myself a 4K monitor. Not have done this 2 years ago when I originally here. So now we've got people with 4K displays and therefore dual monitors. So now there's more people on the core team that have got multi-display setups. Then this is probably something that will come round, organically as something that we go, oh, you know what? I actually want different pictures in different places.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. So many users have dove into Ubuntu 18.04 while it's still in its release phases of beta. Yep. This is very interesting. In my industry, we pretty much have had to stop doing a lot of public betas, because people nowadays, especially in gaming, this is a big one, expect even if it says beta all over it and this is just for testing and things are going to break, they seem to expect it to work fully operational. And I was just curious, do you see that in Mate? Because obviously you've done something incredible with Mate, because when you installed the beta, it did just work. There were little nuances and little things, but the core things all worked. Is that something you have to keep in mind when you're releasing a beta nowadays, that you're going to have a bunch of newer-ish users getting in there expecting a full working desktop?
Yeah, so I suppose, I don't know if my mindset is different. So there's a couple of things here, right? First of all, the Ubuntu base, even through the development cycles, is a really stable base to build on because of all of the automated testing and integration tools that we have in the back-end build systems. It means that the fundamentals of the OS are just working. So long as I don't screw up, the upper layer that I'm responsible for, then it should all just work. And one of the safeguards I have there is I'm always running on my main machine the daily image of whatever the current development machine is. So it has to work. Otherwise, I can't get my job done. Right. So there's kind of that there. Occasionally, we make screw ups. And they're short-lived. I made a bit of a big mess of just after beta 1. I uploaded a package that broke all sorts of people's systems. We'll just gloss over that ever happening, and it was fine a few hours later. But that's why you get people on the bleeding edge. Because better they, 24 people have a hard time for a day than, thousands, a month later. Right. Yeah. So, there's that, you got a good Ubuntu base. I'm careful. And also the alphas and betas that we've been releasing, I've always treated those like they were a release. I've always been very careful to actually make sure that ISO image that goes out, even though everything might not be complete, it hasn't got bugs in it. So we'll deliberately not land something I know if it's got bugs, and just like, well, we'll add that in the next version. But I treated each alpha and beta like it was a release.
Nice.
But that's probably just my OCD, shining through a little bit there.
We like your OCD.
Yeah. And also, Marte is pretty stable. We have great testing happens in Marte itself. So I know that I can build from Git master from the entire Marte project, and I know the whole thing will build and run, at any point in time, which is also a nice safety net. I always know we've got a working platform.
So speaking of the alphas and beta stuff, I'm just curious that you've heard of the Quigley proposal, I'm sure.
I'm familiar with Quigley proposal, yes.
So for those who are not, it's basically a proposal to, instead of doing the alpha betas, to do more of a monthly ISO release. And there could be, pros and cons for it. What do you think is have you considered doing it? And if so, is it more of a full community type thing where everybody is like, how many people do you know of in the flavors have considered?
So yeah, Simon Quigley made this proposal to the Ubuntu release mailing list, and he had consulted with all of the flavor leads prior to doing this, and the TLDR is all of the flavors have agreed to follow the proposal, which basically means we won't be doing alpha 1 and alpha 2 and beta 1 as we have done. We're going to follow Ubuntu's model, which is to do a final beta and release candidate images. And what the foundations team at Canonical are going to be offering the community is to hook up the automated testing that exists for Ubuntu today for each of the flavors. So that also takes some of the burden off actually doing this testing, because we're going to get bots to do some of that for us. So it now means that each of the flavors can focus their testing around, new features that, we don't have test cases for, and new visuals and aesthetics that we don't have test cases for, rather than retesting stuff that really, should be taken for granted, like the installer works, and that's a lot of what the flavor testing involves, is does the installer still function correctly and all that sort of stuff.
So the base benefits of being Ubuntu, like having all the automated stuff, this could actually improve it, so there could be more done on the flavor side.
Yeah. And what we're going to do is transition away from doing the alphas and betas and the flavor community. So all of the flavors together are going to organize these testing weeks. So we're going to nominate some weeks in the development cycle where we all make a noise about, we are testing this week. Come and download the daily ISOs, do your testing, report the bugs in the usual way through the ISO testing tracker. But it's more, instead of each individual flavor saying, hey, it's time to do some testing, we're all going to say it together. And hopefully we'll get better testing results as a result from doing that. So I'm looking forward to this. I'll be interested to see how it works out. But I think the real big value is going to be these automated tests. I think that'll be terrific.
Is this the first transition? Is that going to start for 1810?
Yeah.
Nice.
Excellent. You said earlier on in the interview that you'd moved jobs. Okay. And what are your feelings about snaps? And on the end of it, Rocco made a prediction that he thinks there will be a snap-only distribution sometime this year or sometime in the future.
Okay.
What's your feelings on that?
Right, well, let's start with that prediction. Not this year, Rocco.
Come on.
You should have also mentioned he's terrible at prediction.
Come on. It should be my only one that I get right.
Right, so I take it you're imagining in a world in which you have a desktop distro where all of the components are snaps. Is that yeah, okay. So in terms of desktop distros, no, there's a little ways to go there to do that whole cohesive desktop thing. I think you might start to see the possibility to do some window manager type operating systems with snaps this year. If anyone's interested in picking that up, I've seen some interesting prototypes just recently at work. There's some good stuff coming along there. So yeah, I expect to see some stuff along that.
See, I wasn't that far off.
You're not that far off, but full desktops, there's a whole lot more going on there with display managers and dbus and all sorts of things. And I think that's a little ways out yet. So yeah, I now work as a developer advocate on the Snapgraph team.
On the Snaps. And you think that's the way to go? You think that's the future?
I think that there's definitely a future in Snaps in a whole raft of markets, not just desktop, but Ubuntu. I don't know if you've heard, but we're big on server and cloud. Mm-hmm. we're growing in the IoT space as well. And I find that work fascinating because I get to my passion project is Ubuntu Marte. So I'm a desktop enthusiast, right? I'm one of these hopeless Linux nerds that's the brain stuck in the 1990s. We're going to dominate the desktop someday soon, and I'm doing my bit to make that happen, right? It's a futile task, and that's just the way I'm wired now, and that's where I'm going. My background was in massive compute clusters and data centers and all of that stuff. So I'm sort of multidisciplined. And all this IoT stuff, I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I understand the server component side of it, and I'm fascinated in the device side of it. I like to make my own devices. And I get to work across all of these different domains in the job that I do now and talk to outside organizations who are all working in these spaces and doing different things. So one minute I can be working on some cutting edge desktop application with, a prominent software developer. And then in the afternoon, I can be working with one of the 4 major cloud providers on, what they're doing. And then the next day I can be working with an IoT device manufacturer. And that kind of variety keeps me interested. And, I really thrive on that. So I love the job that I do. And also, I don't know if you know this, but what it means is that we're a team of 2 people. I am one, and Alan Pope is the other. So it means I get to work with my mate Popey, which is also entertaining and wonderful.
How much of that work involves Rust?
Well, we're surprisingly dedicated. So sadly, not that much. Although we have been talking about having another binge on Rust soon, because Opie and I are also a duo in Rust. So we when we were playing back in October, some Windows users had heard mention of Popey and I being on this particular Rust server, and they came out, ganged up on us and tried to raid us and all the rest of it. So there was this whole, you could hear them in the chat. They were going to try and scalp either me or Pope. So we got into some interesting skirmishes as a result of that.
Every time you take someone out, you should type RTFM across the server. Read the manual for the game, then come back and try to play us.
Yeah.
So security and privacy are big things in the news right now, which always helps Linux. That's the journey that led me originally to Linux. And it's obviously a top of mind for many things, especially Facebook and a lot of the invasive practices that have been exposed, at least the ones we could find out. So with that, the fact that a lot of people are probably going to start looking at Linux with all this privacy news coming out there, are there some things that Mate is doing on top of the standard privacy and security that Linux provides as a whole to kind of add some new features in there to help people with that?
Right. Well, in terms of Ubuntu, there is a facility in the installer where you can enable full disk encryption. And that's something that I've been taking advantage of for a long while now. That is almost zero cost on modern processors because all of that capability is integrated into the CPUs now. Nice. So I encourage people to take advantage of full disk encryption. If your laptop gets stolen or your house gets broken into and your computer taken away, then all of that data that's on there is effectively safe. You may have lost it unless you're doing backups, but nobody's going to get at your data. Something that Ubuntu Mate did from the very beginning is we bundle a desktop firewall application in the distro, so that and it's multi-profile. So it's got I'm at home, I'm in a public space, and I'm at work, and you can have different rules depending on where you are. So that's, basic, good, security common sense.
Yeah. Is it GUFW?
It is GUFW, yeah. It's made by a good friend of mine, Marcos Costales, who is the organizer of UbuCon Europe in Spain, which I'm going to next week.
Nice.
Now, some things that I've looked at in the past, I have investigated various antivirus solutions that are available for Linux with a view to featuring those in the software boutique, as in not lots of them, but finding one that we can put in there that people can install, because I think people have been saying for a long time, oh, well, you don't get viruses on Linux. And that's kind of true, but also kind of not true. Yeah. And I think we're entering a bit of a dangerous time now where Linux, there's enough awareness around Linux that in some cases it's one of the platforms that people specifically target. And we shouldn't take it for granted that we don't need to run antivirus anymore because we're safe. But I haven't found a good desktop integrated antivirus solution. So if my research has come up short and I'm just wrong, I would love to hear, good quality implementations of antivirus software that have desktop integration. I would love to feature something like that. Go on.
No, I was going to say it's interesting because I just was reading a Reddit post on the Linux forums of somebody saying, hey, I just switched to Linux. How do I get what antivirus do I use on this? So they're so used to as well that besides what you're talking about of having to have that as Windows, like it practically comes bundled with, you go to any store and buy a Windows computer, they're going to try to sell you on an antivirus, that it's something that they're looking for as well when they come over to Linux. But
and it's hard to explain, even if it is true. Like even in most cases where you don't need it, you don't necessarily need a antivirus, but it wouldn't hurt to have one. And typically it wouldn't hurt to have one if there's one that's like reliable. But then there's the situation where a lot of people, like Ryan was saying, like they're expecting it because it's been ingrained in them so long that it's a normal computing thing now.
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's something I think we need to look at, but I don't think it needs to be kind of the antivirus solutions you see today. They are so invasive. They in fact, in a lot of ways, I opted out of these big antivirus suites. In a couple of jobs ago, we're looking after half our company was running Linux on the desktop and the other half were running Windows on the desktop. So we had to have those, antivirus solutions in place. And we were looking at all of these things and they were so invasive that, that these antivirus solutions, that they take up the majority of the resources that the computer has available. And in the end, we ended up going back to basics and we were using Windows Defender or Security Essentials or whatever it's called now. Because that did a good enough job for what we needed, which was we didn't need application firewalls on every, device on the network. We just needed, basic, on-demand virus scanning. So, I don't think we need, like these encompassing suites of things. I think we just need something good for just going over your documents, because you receive an email from a friend. Does that have a virus in it? Doesn't matter whether or not you're infected or not. You should just know whether or not somebody sent you something that's got a virus in it.
Yeah. And your message out there is super important. The responses to the post on Reddit were all, you don't need one on Linux. You don't need one on Linux. You're fine on Linux. Yeah. And I cringe at that because I've been thinking a long time, you challenge a hacker to do anything, they're going to get it to work. It's just what they do. So if you think your system's invulnerable, it's just simply never going to be. There's no such thing as 100% security.
And we will get caught with our pants down one day, because we've been saying you don't need antivirus, and one day there will be a virus that's specifically targeted at Linux, and we're all going to be horribly embarrassed.
Yeah, and the media is going to jump on that like a big bandwagon.
They jump on anything if it has Linux and some maybe remotely negative security. They're like, this is just candy day. Like we're
Linux, the new big brother. That'll be the headline.
So Martin, you're very active within the community, and you regularly appear in Telegram groups and interacting with users via social media. Now, this is something that quite a few distro developers are very weak in. Have you found that this has helped you shape Marte better, or is it sometimes a bit of a pain because you've got this one awkward person who just doesn't go away? Right.
Whoa!
Wow.
You might want to get a cough drop
kind
for that
of
cough.
person that just decides to private message you out of nowhere, no introduction, just hey, how do I tile my windows? Damn it!
This really hurt you. I can see it's really hurt your feelings, Martin. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It wasn't 2 o'clock in the morning or anything. It's fine.
You were up working, so I figured why not?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, you
that's
can
great.
get online with that damn thing, can't you? Anyway, your point. Part of it is it's good fun to interact with people in the community. You learn a bunch of stuff. You know, I found out about, you know, techniques. I mean, in the very early days of Ubuntu Mate. And I think this is probably true for any distro. When you bootstrap a distro, there are a bunch of people out there who know what needs to be done and know how to help. And in the first 6 months, we had piles of contributions from people who were just helping polish this turd that I'd created and turn it into something half decent. And without that sort of means of finding these people, at me saying, oh, look, we've made this, and them to pick holes in it and provide solutions, it would have been very slow going. So we've had loads of useful contributions come back through those engagements on the social networks and what have you, and in the Ubuntu Mate community site itself. Yes, I agree. As a massive generalism, the open source, the Linux desktop enthusiasts, those people making desktop Linux are absolutely terrible at publicizing what they're making and, in air quotes, selling it or promoting it to people to, you know, get people to come along and either get involved in the project or at least try it or let them know that they're making it. And so that was something that I you know, if you're going to make something, you know, one of my bosses way back said to me, you know, if you don't measure it, it's not worth doing. And it's a reference to metrics and benchmarking. And therefore, by having communities of people and seeing how many thousands of people are engaged in what you're doing, you can tell whether or not whether it's a worthwhile endeavor or not. You know, so I can remember being over the moon when we had 300 members in our Google Plus group. And I even posted a nice meme, you know, 300, you know, image, thinking this is amazing. There are 300 people here who are taking part in this. And, you know, we've gone many times over that now. Yeah, I enjoy that. It's a great source of feedback. And I would say to other projects, you should do that better. And I've had a couple of long conversations with Daniel Foray at Elementary, where he's asked me about, you know, how I've gone about doing things. And I've given him some advice on things that I've thought have worked well and things that he should consider for Elementary. And I think he's taken that on board and he's had a good think about it. And then now you'll see that they're posting regularly through Medium about, you know, the status of the project and what they're working on. Yep. And they're much more community focused. You know, their community was the people that were working on it, not so much as the people that were using it. And I think Daniel's really turned that around, and that's great to see. And I think, you know, more distros should be, you know, mindful of that and engaging with their users.
Yeah, I think Daniel's a good example of taking your example and, you know, running with it, because he's started doing, being on podcasts and stuff, like he was on Destination Linux. He's doing like the Medium thing, as you're saying, and he's been more active in like Twitter engagement and stuff like that. So it is nice to see that other distros are taking that example, and, you know.
Yeah, and after your comment, Daniel was just such a good person to interview, because he just didn't mention anything about, and you know, you have 8,040 members on your Ubuntu Mate now, but I just want to let you know, after making fun of me, you now only have 8,039.
Well,
I'm teasing. So speaking of the growth that Mate is, and Ubuntu Mate has seen over the few years or so, what are some of the outcomes that you've seen as like the popularity, like the positives and like the negatives of that popularity?
Wow. Okay. So I think the popularity side of things is that when you have more users, more of those users are likely to be developers, and you attract more developers. And this was one of the goals of Ubuntu Mate from the outset. It's one of the objectives of the project. And we're definitely seeing that. And it's taken a while, but, you know, for example, Victor Carrar, who's done did the superkeys work, did the acceleration in the window manager, and did the high DPI implementation. He's found Mate and found a means to contribute to the project. And he probably we wouldn't have found him, and he wouldn't have found us if it wasn't for Ubuntu Mate. So all of the other developers and the drive-by committers, I love all of this army of people who maybe just drop into our GitHub. They've got this one problem and they just bung you a bug fix for this one thing. And then you don't see them for a year until they find another problem that irks them. And then I love those people. I think ace. I think it's great that and it's surprising how many people there are with these niche skills, bloody C and GTK and all its hairy nonsense. You know, they're able to unpick this monstrosity and just ninja in fixes for things without being like super familiar with the project. I love that stuff, but it's these long-term contributors. So I think the biggest thing is developers, attracting developers to Mate and improving Mate and just improving the system at all. I suppose one of the detractors is when you become popular, more people try your stuff out. And there's a lot of self-entitled Linux users out there who, you know, don't read the manual.
This interview's over.
He doesn't have to take this.
That is a hazard. We deal with that all the time.
No, sorry, Ryan. Last dig, I promise.
That's a lie.
Who, you know, are armchair pundits about the landscape of Linux, and they say pretty disrespectful, hurtful things about what other people are creating, and their output is toxic. It doesn't help the projects they're talking about. It doesn't help the Linux community at large because it makes us look like a bunch of infighting arse-hats. And, you know, the more popular you become, the more of that kind of attention that you attract. And, you know, I would rather those people just, you know, go and make a distro that makes them happy and not tell anyone about it.
We unfortunately run into these people, you know, at times ourselves. For the most part, most of the community is incredible. Yeah. But every once in a while, you get this response or this post or this reply, and it's almost like you want to tell them, you realize there are other choices out there, and that's what makes Linux unique. So instead of acting like the world is going to end because you don't have some feature or the developer didn't put something in that you want, either get over it, contribute, or move on. I mean, in some cases, it's not that they want something new. It's that they're so mad. They literally seem like they feel the world is truly going to end because of this. And I would tell them, take that passion and put it into creating something. But it is a toxic part of the Linux community. It's a part of any community, really, but it is one that is very, very negative, and they tend to be extraordinary. They tend to be very extreme when they're on that side. It's just very extreme.
I would endorse that mentality, right? So way back, 2010, 2011, something like that, I was an Ubuntu user. I was finding it increasingly difficult to wrench the bits of Unity that had just been introduced out of Ubuntu to restore a workflow that I was comfortable with. And there was lots of toxicity around Ubuntu at that time. My response was to actually take positive action, which was just to find another distribution that I could work with, that I was happy with at that time. So I did. I switched to Arch Linux, but I took positive action. You know, I didn't moan about Ubuntu. I didn't have a rant in a place where nobody from Canonical or Ubuntu is ever going to see it or ever going to get surfaced in any meaningful way. I just reviewed all of the distros that were out there at the time, and I found one that was going to work for me, and I switched. That is how you should do it. If you're so And if you're not going to do that, if you're not going to prepare to move somewhere else, then help improve the thing or fix the thing that you're so incandescent about. Now, that's all a bit negative. So let's try and end on a positive on that question. The other benefit is Ubuntu Marte started a crowdfunder for $135 a month so that we could host our own forums that weren't linked to a social network platform. So this is back in, I don't know, late 2014, early 2015, something like that. And that's how much it was going to cost, because I decided we were going to use Discourse, and that's got quite beefy requirements. So $135 a month. If we can pony that up, then that's good. So we started a Patreon, and we were taking one-off payments through PayPal. Roll on a few years, and we're drawing in quite a significant amount of money through that, well over the $135 a month that we needed. Although along the way, we were spending thousands of dollars a month on bandwidth for the Raspberry Pi images that we make available. They're epically popular, and they're like gigabyte each. So that was rather expensive to provide. We've now got a sponsor covering all of our server. It's Bytemark. So we have this money. So the advantage of being popular is people back the Ubuntu Marte crowdfunding, and we put that to good use to fund developers to work on the stuff. So, Victor could have absolutely developed the high DPI stuff, but we were able to motivate and focus his attention on working on high DPI and the acceleration in Marco and the super key stuff by compensating him for the spare time that he was investing in Marte, in all of this development, by effectively paying him. And also, we're not paying peanuts. It's not like, what's that thing? Bounty Sauce, where you see, make me the moon on a stick and I'll give you $10. We actually pay, a sensible amount of money. Now, Victor is not making a wage off of that work, and it's still way below market value, but it was a significant amount of money that we were able to fund Victor, compensate Victor for. And we do this in projects all through Ubuntu. In fact, I believe, Michael, you've been on the receiving end of
I participated in that.
Yeah.
And it's your point about it being a significant amount of money, but not like a wage. When you came to me and asked me if I wanted to participate in this particular situation where I helped the high DPI of the graphics side of stuff, and that when the amount that you having being offered anything was like, oh wow, this is very different than any project I've contributed to, and the amount was not like this is an amazing amount, but it was enough for me to go, this is like a very serious venture that they're doing. To if you're giving like a certain any kind of money at all to developers and it'll increase the amount of people who want to participate. Yep. And it was also like it's enough where that project respects your time to be contributing to the project. And I was going to do it for free, and then you offer to do it as it's just like a principal thing. It was amazing. So that kind of a dedication to the community is fantastic to see. Yeah.
And, all of the advancements that have happened between 1604 and 1804, anything that's significant, if I haven't developed it myself, anything that's been done by anybody else of any significance is being funded work. So the work that Daniel Foray did on the new icon sets, that was funded. All the work on the graphic stuff was done. All of the Ubuntu Marte themes, we've got a guy who's done all of the work there to uplift all of those and fully implement all of the GTK3 style classes. It's probably been our most significant outlay on investment. We've got some other projects that we're supporting, which will begin to pay off as we get into the 1810 cycle. There's a whole bunch of endeavors going on, but the momentum that the project has, it is largely due to being able to incentivize people to work on things in a sort of a focused way. I've got this vision of we're here and in 2 years we need to be there. And I've been able to use this crowdfunding to sort of guide the project and the developers down, a series of paths to make everything happen.
That's a great point about the whole bystander effect, where you go, is any developers interested in helping? They might be interested, but not know what they would want from them.
Right.
When you ask them specifically, it makes it a lot easier to contribute as well.
Yeah.
All right. So according to your manifesto, one of the commitments that you guys have made was maintaining an option for Mate on lower end hardware. I would imagine this is very difficult as we talk about kind of, working with the community and everything else. Some people have some really old hardware out there that you're trying to balance. I want to make Mate futuristic, yet I still, part of our manifesto, we're kind of balancing some of that with making sure we're not too resource heavy. How are you guys figuring that balance out? At what point do you cut off somebody's, Tandy and say it's just too old?
So I think there's two things here, right? There's the Marte Manifesto, which I think is what you're referring to, mm-hmm. So the upstream Marte project. And then there's objectives of the Ubuntu Marte project. Now, in some cases, the manifesto of Marte and the objectives of Ubuntu Marte overlap. There are things that are in common, and there are some places where they diverge. Now, Marte itself, in terms of being, it's never been about being a lightweight thing. I in fact, this whole, it's lightweight really irks me. It's just the most annoying thing ever, right? So lightweight usually means feature incomplete and it doesn't integrate well. That's what lightweight means. It means I want a degraded experience right now because I value that 80 megabytes of memory.
And there are people that value that.
Yeah, but it just doesn't make any sense.
That's what open box is for.
It really doesn't. And people say, Ubuntu Mate, it's getting all, bloated. And I'm thinking, it runs on a Raspberry Pi. If it runs on a Raspberry Pi, if you haven't got a computer that's got equivalent capabilities, just go and buy a Raspberry Pi. So
it's $35. That's like 40 squid in your money.
Yeah. Now, what I do value is 35 squid in our money. What I do value is something being efficient. Right. And that's what the Mate desktop is. Now, we're lucky in that it's the vast majority of it is implemented in C. So that makes it a very efficient system. Mate itself doesn't have all of those integrations that I talked about earlier. It can integrate with accessibility services and it can integrate with all of these different pluggable devices and hooks and what have you. But you don't have to do that. You could run it in, almost no memory at all. But I choose to, integrate it with all of the things. The one area upstream Mate where we really pay attention to resource consumption is specifically when it's being used in remote terminal services type deployments. We've got very strong ties to the X2Go project. Mate is hand in glove with everything that X2Go do, and X2Go have a consultancy division wing, and Mate is used widely when they're doing remote terminal services. So that is the one area where we pay very close attention, and that's the one reason why the non-composited desktop option still exists, because in that particular use case, that is king. That's what you want.
Yeah.
But for running it, you can't buy a computer today that is incapable of running a composited desktop. You can't buy a computer today that's incapable of running a 3D rendered desktop. All of these chips have IGPs in them that are all capable of, spewing bazillions of pixels onto the screen. It's just a non-issue. So we're not lightweight. We're lightweight as an accident of history, but we are efficient, and we have a focus on where we concentrate our efficiencies. Ubuntu Mate itself has never targeted lightweightness. It frustrates me no end when I see people referring to Ubuntu Mate as a lightweight distro, and it's like, in fact, I think we even have it in the objectives. Let me have a look here. What does it say? Software selection will favor functionality over functionality and stability over lightness and whimsy. I actually outline it. We don't care about lightness, you know.
It's so funny because so many people were trolling you out there. The reason why I was looking into that question is because when I was going through all these reviews of Mate, just looking at other people's views and some of the things they said, a lot of the news posts will compare it as a lightweight, say this is a lightweight option, just like, XFCE and it's kind of the same thing there where that's not necessarily what they're shooting for anymore. It's kind of changed. And that's why, I wanted to bring it up, but a lot of people seem to have caught on to that somehow, that's,
this whole lightweight thing is sort of a Linux meme. And it meant something like 15 years ago, lightweight meant something useful because at that time, the abundance of resources in computers, everything was still single core. You didn't have multi-gigabytes of RAM in computers. And the comparison between Linux and the other things, the advantage is that Linux was lightweight and you could do more in less. But the fact is now is that world just doesn't exist anymore.
It doesn't matter.
So people pursuing lightweight devices. Why are you wasting your time fighting with integration issues and feature incomplete software? Just install the product. And also, I went through years of this. God, poor quality software, feature incomplete. No desktop environments, just really bad window managers and Xforms, a terrible toolkit that had an email client, and that's where XFCE started. Just went through this abysmal period of having this terrible computing experience, and now look where we are. You've got KDE and GNOME and Mate and Pantheon from Elementary and Cinnamon. We've got this abundance of really polished desktop environments. Why worry about a few extra megabytes of memory when you could just have a really polished desktop experience?
And they're also even in the meme aspect is true because the fact that even like the heaviest thing in Linux is still lighter than everything else.
Exactly right.
I cannot wait to release my next video. Mate, my favorite light desktop. Oh, it's gonna be grand.
When you see a thumbs down on that video, you know where it came from.
He's used to thumbs down on his videos, let me tell you.
What is this? Gang up on me? What is going on here? I don't have to take this.
So going back to what we talked about earlier about the contributors, we mentioned that Popey had like a lot of involvement in the creation of Ubuntu Mate. But what do you think? Who are some individuals that can contribute to the success of Mate over the years?
Right. Let's just get this one out of the way because I know that this is a constant source of embarrassment for Popey. Popey's entire contribution to Ubuntu Mate was making me tea in his kitchen on a summer's day when we kicked the thing off, like in the summer of 2014.
Does he make a good cup of tea?
He does make an excellent cup of tea.
Well, was it Mate tea?
Then again, he's British, and that's the law. So he invited me over to his house, and he established some connections between me and people working on the Ubuntu project and helped get the thing bootstrapped. Now, he did admittedly make the very first spin of the ISO, but since that first 2-week period, he has done precisely nothing on Ubuntu Mate. He knows it. He won't be embarrassed by me saying this. There was a YouTube video just came out a couple of days ago, and they cite me and Popey as creating this thing. And Popey's messaging me on Telegram, I'm still getting the hat tip for and I've done nothing on it for years. And I'm like, yeah, I know. So Popey, he did absolutely. There wouldn't be an Ubuntu Mate without Popey, but his involvement was for a very, very narrow period. In terms of the people that have contributed, there's some names of people that you might recognize. Ike Doherty and Stefan Rick, who are from Solus. They work on the Brisk menu, and through the crowdfunding that I mentioned, they've landed a number of enhancements to Brisk menu specifically for what Ubuntu Mate wants to achieve. And that new Dash launcher is one of those. Larry Bushy, if you're familiar with the Going Linux podcast, he's the presenter of the Going Linux podcast. He writes all of our documentation. So he's worked on the content in Ubuntu Mate Welcome. He wrote the Ubuntu Mate guide, which is integrated, and he wrote the 2 books that are available from our shop. Simon Quigley, I know you've had him on the show recently. He's somebody I chat to regularly. He's a very prolific contributor in the Ubuntu community. And Simon's great for getting stuff packaged up quickly and into the archives in Debian and Ubuntu. So Simon has benefited from crowdfunding, where I've said we need this software packaging up, and I don't have time to do it because I'm going to sit in the garden and drink champagne. Can you can you do it for me? So he's been involved in that. Sam Hewitt is a name some people might know. He's been involved in design and icons and themes and what have you in the Linux space for forever. And I contacted him in the very early days, and he created the Ubuntu Mate logo, to which I'm internally indebted because he licensed that under Creative Commons. We've been able to sell merch, and I think it's a really terrific logo he came up with. Really, really simple but clever design. I mentioned Daniel Foray. You know, he about a year ago reworked all of the default icons in Mate to borrow from what he'd learned doing elementary in the past. Michael here, who retouched a whole bunch of assets to do high DPI variants and recolored variants for the Mate desktop.
Look at that shot out, Michael. That's pretty cool.
Pedro, he read the manual as well. Pedro Mateus. Pedro Mateus from Linux Gamecast. He's done a bunch of work analyzing the relative performance of the different window managers on Mate and what the tweaks we should ship by default to optimize those pipelines. Jonathan Nadeau, who some people will know as being active in the visually impaired community, he gave us some good advice early on and did some sort of verification that our image, Ubuntu Mate was an accessible operating system. There's a different outfit that we're working with now. Jonathan's not so involved in this, but there's a French organization who ship a Debian-based OS with Mate, government-backed specifically for visually impaired users, and they've now filled that role of helping us ensure that what we do is accessible to everyone. And in the early days, Matt Hartley was involved as well. He gave us some advice on what to do. And then there's a cast of thousands, names that you won't be familiar with, but without whom it would have simply been impossible to, put this whole thing together and serve it up.
I'm somewhere in that list of thousands, by the way, guys.
Yeah, you totally are.
Yeah. Well, noticing the Michael Tennell link there for his contributor status, I think he thinks it should be higher in the list. What do you think about that?
It's not a list based on priority. It's just a random assorted order of people that have done stuff.
Yeah, I wouldn't assume I'd be any higher than top 10, of course. Right.
I mean, if Popey gets in there for just making tea, I think you should be moved up.
It was really good tea.
It was really good tea. All right, perfect.
All right. So the Linux community is vast and growing. And you've obviously got a good group around you. And there's many people doing some exciting work to change the Linux landscape, including yourself. But is there anybody out there that is like your inspiration and you think, wow, I wish I could do more along those lines? Who inspires you?
Yeah, there's lots to look at, right? There's lots of stuff to look at. I suppose there's this small group of distro maintainers who are connected with one another in one way or another. And I'm particularly friendly with Daniel Foray from Elementary and Ike from Solus, and speak to both of them fairly regularly. And I think what's interesting there is that each of us, our personalities and interests are reflected in the distributions that we make. I am a fan of very utilitarian, function and usefulness, not necessarily gracefully so. Daniel is very, and I think you see that in Ubuntu Mate. It's functional and it's sturdy, but it's not beautiful by any means. It gets the job done, and that's the sort of thing that appeals to me. Daniel is really focused on the elegance and the importance of design language and expressing meaning and all the rest of it. And you see that in elementary, right? That design language speaks to you and it communicates to you is in a very clear and succinct way. And it's quite beautiful what they've made. Ike is a ricer, and consequently everything in Solus is tuned to 11, and every option is very carefully chosen. And, it's a very fast, bleeding edge distribution. Daniel is creating a, what's the right comparison? Well, let's get to Ike. Ike is a Pagani Sonda. Daniel is an Aston Martin, and I'm a Mercedes G-Wagon. And I think those comparisons are borne out through things, and I can learn from what Ike's doing. Ike's obviously solving some problems that other distributions solved in the past, but he is having to solve them today, and consequently the way he's solving them today is very differently from how they were solved before. And I think a lot of distributions could learn some things from how Solus is doing things today, where he's taking a different or modern approach to some of the things that he's doing. And I think that what Daniel and the Elementary Project are doing, they're being far more thoughtful and considered in the way that they're presenting their work and the design that goes into it. And I'm I would love to steal more elements from what both of them are doing, and introduce that into Ubuntu Mate, because, I could have the fastest, prettiest tractor in the field if, if that were possible.
So I want to have a bit of a chin wag here. I'm trying to learn your language and speak to Zeb, be able to communicate with Zeb better. So I'm hoping you can kind of help me out here.
Right.
So let me know how I do. Do you like Marmite when you're knackered, and how many squids does it cost where you're at?
I do love Marmite. I love Marmite at any time of day, not just when I'm knackered. 250 grams of Marmite costs you 2.5 squid. I'm also partial to Bovril, and Bovril goes for 3.5 squid for the same amount, another 250 grams. And by the way, I got my granddad's scales out of the garage earlier, so 250 grams in old fashioned is 9 ounces.
Man, that's brilliant. Well done, sir. Well done.
I love it.
And it just goes to show that you can have two people on there. You love it, I hate it.
Right. Okay.
I can't eat Bovril or Marmite.
Oh, well, so I love both. And what I particularly love about it is Marmite's made from a yeast extract. So in the Midlands, there's the Bass Brewery, and right next door is the Marmite factory, and all the slurry from the beer production runs off from the Bass Brewery into the Marmite production. This is sort of industrial symbiotic relationship.
Sounds delicious.
And what is Bovril?
So Bovril is also sort of that black tar coloured stuff. So Marmite's a vegetable yeast extract, and Bovril's the same idea, but it's a beef extract.
Okay, sounds
they've
great.
Both got similar flavours, but Bovril's slightly milder. Marmite's definitely got more tang and bite to it.
Can't imagine why we're not importing that here in the US.
Oh, I tell you what, you miss. I tell you why. It's too good for your
palates or McDonald's.
Keep it all here for ourselves.
Yeah. What was it that famous movie quote from the Pretty Boy? You can't handle the truth. You can handle Bovril. Yeah.
Marmite's gorgeous. I once gave some Marmite on toast to a Spanish friend of mine, And he pulled a face and in sort of broken English explained he thought it tasted like axle grease. I assure you, it's absolutely delicious.
Of course it is. Of course it is.
Yeah.
Of course it is.
All right, so let's get a bit down to yourself, Martin. If you was going to buy a computer on eBay,
Right.
what programs would you install on it, and how would you customize it, obviously outside of installing Marte on it?
If I was to buy a computer, well, I'd just install Ubuntu Marte on it.
Okay, let's twist that around a little bit.
Right.
If you were to buy a computer, if I was to buy a Martin Wimpress computer that was formerly owned by Martin Wimpress, what would we find on it?
Well, I would install the latest LTS of Ubuntu Marte on it. I'd use the OEM installer. So the first time you turn it on, it takes you through the, what language do you want to use? What's your keyboard layout? All of that. So you get that out of box experience, because that's something that all of the Ubuntus can do. And the only customization I would make is I would put the documentation as a shortcut on the desktop.
That's a good option.
That's a good option. That should be default, probably.
Yeah.
Huh?
Maybe
At least for American users.
maybe some heuristics. Maybe some heuristic. But if you've got something like Ryan in the username, it does that.
Am I gonna make my way into manual?
Wow.
Like, don't be like this guy, and there's gonna be a picture of me there. And skip this section. I can see it now.
So we can actually now rename that Ryan the Fantastic Manual.
Oh,
Yeah.
Love it.
So speaking of like getting new computers and stuff, but what's the first program you install in a new system or just in general?
Right. Okay. There's two parts to that. The very first thing I would install is the LastPass extension into my browser. That would be the first thing I install.
Yeah.
In terms of like software on the computer, two bits of software. One is called Yadim, and the other is called DIRENV. And Yadim is yet another dot manager. So the reason I need LastPass is in order to get the password to my private Git repository and use Yadim to check out all of my dot file configuration.
Nice.
And that's not just my dot configuration for stuff like, the shell and what have you, but it's got all of like my graphical applications, Mumble and GIMP and just everything you could think of. I've got all of that config in there. So I check that out. Then it can store some private data as well. So things like my VPN keys and things of that nature, SSH keys, and that's encrypted. And I then use Yadim to decrypt and then deploy all of those onto the system. And then it's got a little initialize script, which then installs all of the developer tools that I need. So those things, logging into LastPass, using Yadim to check out my stuff, deposit all the dot files and bootstrap my environment. That whole process takes about 4 minutes. And from that point forwards, as soon as I install any bit of software, it's automatically picked up all of my previous settings. So I can be off to the races really quick.
Nice. I actually just expected some kind of like, a different browser or something. And now I have to go look at Yadim now. So that
Yadim is brilliant. Yadim's really good. And so DIRENV is the other one. In my little Yadim configuration, I have a folder called development. And that's where I do all my development. And then within that, there's one folder for Debian and another for Ubuntu and another for the Marte desktop and another for Ubuntu Marte and so on, for all of the things I work on. What DIRENV has is you can create a single file in a directory with all of the environment variables that define the characteristics for what you're doing. So when I'm working in Debian, I need particular GPG signing keys. I need a particular email address exported. I need a username. All of that stuff. So as you change directories in these projects, it automatically switches the context and reloads all of these environment variables. So I don't have to do a load of setup for each project. I just change directory and all of the context for what I need to work on those projects is automatically stood up for me. It's a real time saver. So they're invaluable. Without those, I'd be wasting hours of time a day messing around.
I'm definitely going to check those out because I would like to I would like to start distro hopping myself.
Right.
So, that would be a good tool for that.
Yes.
So what are some of the ones that you guys use? Like for me, it's Simple Note, LastPass, or Bitwarden. What is it for you, Michael? What are your first programs you install?
Well, I mean, Bitwarden is my main. It's basically LastPass, but an open source version. And I also, I'd say the most important thing for me to set up front is KDE Connect. Like I need I need that connection to my phone like immediately, because it's so convenient that when I don't have it, I am really annoyed by it not having it.
So what is it? I'm going to ask you some questions now. What is it about KDE Connect that's so valuable to you? What does it do that you can't do without?
Okay, the most important thing is the clipboard management system. So, like, I love the fact that, like, with Plasma or any DE, I will install a clipboard manager, and being able to have my clipboard sync to my phone. So, let's say, for example, I need to do something from Bitwarden or LastPass, and I get the content. When I do it in the computer, I can just not even install any password manager on my phone, and KDE Connect will send the password to my phone in the clipboard, and I can log in that way and not have to worry about is some random weird, it's Facebook trying to track my passwords or something. Right. So there's that benefit. The fact that I have the ability to have mount my phone's file system in my file manager just from clicking a button is amazing. Like I can manage all of my files without having to worry about, is it connected to the USB setup? Is it tethering? Or is it in the charging? Or is it MPT or whatever? It's just click it, mount it to the file manager, good to go. Like there's so many things that make it amazing that.
Well, the work email is a big one that people don't talk about. Like I have my workstation over here. This is if I'm doing personal things or whatnot, sometimes because of my job, I'm on call 24/7. I need to be able to see a work email pop in that, hey, you need to work on this. And I could see it on my personal computer because my phone is connected to my work VPN. Whereas if I didn't have that, I'd have no idea, that necessarily came up. Or popped up even during a show or something like that, where I don't want notifications dinging and blinging in the background, but I need to see somebody's important message.
That too. I actually don't have notifications on my desktop at all, ever. I have all my notifications on my phone. So when I like doing the show and I do put it in Do Not Disturb, nothing disturbs me at all because it's all coming through the phone anyway. Yeah. So there's that benefit. There's also
don't forget about the most important feature. It's like when you can, when you misplace your phone and you can ping it.
Oh, yeah. you can ping your phone.
Yeah, good point.
I also like the music player where I can control my music player on my desktop from my phone. I'm walking around the house and I can, click the next. Like that's not that important as the other stuff, but it's fun to have. Or using your phone's touch screen as a touchpad for your mouse. And there's so many benefits to it that it is something when I completely notice it when I don't have it.
Right. Okay. Well, you'll be pleased to hear that KDE Connect Indicator is in the software boutique.
Oh yes. I mean, as soon as I install Ubuntu Mate for any testing or anything, it's like KDE Connect. Okay, cool. Thank you. When you first added that, it was something where I was like, I was so relieved that I didn't have to deal with all the PPA structure to get it all set up. So
I went through most of the 1804 cycle. We didn't have a working Ubuntu Mate welcome, and I had to install software like a barbarian, going PPAs and third party repositories, and it was like, oh, this is how the other half live.
Oh my gosh, that example seems so true. I just did Gentoo install and like the barbarian thing. Oh my god.
That's worse. That's like caveman type.
I'm like, where's my punch cards that I insert at some point to get this thing running? Jeez.
Yeah.
So, okay. Well, let's say in like a horrible post-apocalyptic alternate universe where Mate did not exist, what alternative desktop environment would you be interested in using?
Wow. Okay. I think there's two. One I've touched on. Elementary or Pantheon, I'd be interested in because it's GTK, and therefore everything I know about GTK applications and the applications that I like, I can bring over, and it's pretty. I think that Daniel and I, the gentlemen that we are able to agree to disagree on some of the design directions of Elementary, and they may frustrate me, but it's nothing that I couldn't work around. So I think that that's an interesting project. Now the other one would be LXQt. I think that's got a lot of potential, primarily because it doesn't use GTK. I think that the GTK based desktops right now, if you are not buying into what GNOME are selling, it's going to get painful again pretty soon. And this is a classic desktop metaphor built on top of Qt. It's straightforward, it's intuitive, and there's some good quality Qt applications that you can bundle on top to give you a really decent, desktop experience. You got the Falcon browser, which is a native Qt browser, which is quite decent. I wouldn't use it myself. I'd probably stick with Firefox, but it's there. There's Clementine, is a very decent music player. There's lots of options. So LXQt and Elementary.
Let's not forget about our favorite feature, that it's a lightweight desktop environment.
See, you'd be wrong in thinking that. LXQt is what I would classify as most Linux desktops as a modest desktop environment in terms of its resources. They're all about the same now. There's not much between them.
All right, so you have some collaborations going with Entroware, which is a UK-based computer manufacturer. So that comes preloaded with Mate. So do you have any other collaborations in the works or coming down the line?
Not as such. We did have one with another outfit for a while, who were like a Portuguese company who were trying to do what Librem are doing, which was, blobless, total freedom stuff. And they were shipping Ubuntu Mate, but they weren't able to make ends meet. I'm really happy with the collaboration I have in place with Entroware. They're fantastic to work with. And I know that they wouldn't get in our way of working with anybody else. But I feel I owe them some loyalty for, everything that they've done for the Ubuntu Mate project. And hopefully, I've done some things. The thing about Entroware is this. So just this week, a little insight into how the sausage is made. There's been some problems with the NVIDIA drivers in Ubuntu 18.04. 18.04, that's this one. And it's been really hard to track down what the problem is. You get this usual thing of people on the issue tracker who are trying to be helpful, but don't necessarily have the right technical insight to give the information that's required. Anyway, Entroware are testing their line of machines that have got NVIDIA hybrid graphics, NVIDIA and Intel graphics in them, and they bump into this issue. They go onto the issue tracker, and for every flavor of Ubuntu and for every model of laptop, they contact the maintainer of the driver and say, what do you need to know? And they put together the debug logs for every flavor for each of their laptop models with all of the hardware specs of everything, and basically provided like a gold mine of information, which meant that we could actually identify what the problem is. And consequently, it is now fixed.
Wow.
And that was just brilliant. And then a couple of days later, I saw them pop up. You'll be aware that there's this telemetry capability in Ubuntu now. And they popped up and said, we've been looking at the source code for this, and we don't think that you're, prioritizing like vendor versus chassis vendor correctly. And the guys that developed it said, we'd looked at this documentation on these wikis, and that's how we'd come to this conclusion. And they were like, that's only good for like tier 1 vendors, but for everyone else that has an ODM relationship, which is like tier 2 and down, then these properties are found in different. Here's the specification document that outlines how this, and then they outline how this should be changed to better support this. And so there's a whole changelog entry about, thanks to Entroware for explaining how this SMI specification works so that, we can make these changes. So they're really engaged in the Ubuntu community. One outfit that I am interested in talking to more is Slimbooks, who are in Spain. I met them at UbuCon in Paris, and I will meet them again next week at UbuCon in Spain. And the Ubuntu podcast has their KDE Slimbook in as a review unit. And if there was another organization who I would trust to ship Ubuntu Mate in the right way, it would be them. And they've got some real interesting devices. So if I share a beer with them and they suggest the idea, I would go with that. But then you have to be careful because Tuxedo approached us last year and that was just terrible. And if you want to hear the full horror story, go and listen to season 10, episode 14 of the Ubuntu podcast. And
well, looking at your page with Entroware, they got all kinds of different laptops and all-in-ones and desktops. And if they're going to be a company that contributes like you were talking about, like that's the way to go. I mean, that's a good company.
Yeah, that's the best kind.
Yep. They're really, really doing it all right. They sponsor OggCamp, so they're usually a platinum sponsor at OggCamp, which is not an insignificant amount of money. And they usually have one of their decent laptops as like the raffle prize for the raffle. So you get loads of people buying, bucket loads of raffle tickets because there's an Entroware laptop, in the prize draw. So, they're real grassroots. You don't hear from them very much, but they're very much connected, in the Linux community where it matters. They're good guys.
So while I didn't read the manual, as you've so pointed out during this episode, I did read Lexion.org's some of your information on there. One of the things I absolutely love that I saw you doing, because I had a project recently where I've done some neat things with the Raspberry Pi and the console in my car, but you recently took a Raspberry Pi and turned it into a do-it-yourself SNES Classic edition, which looks awesome. So we've already established that you're a gamer. Is that something you're still playing with, using there? And how involved are you in with that aspect of gaming with the Raspberry Pi?
Oh, wow. Okay, there's a couple of things there. So that project I loved doing, and I do things like that. But you'll notice that blog is from like December or it's January 2017 or something. It's like a year old or something. I don't get to communicate the other stuff that I work on because writing stuff down, it's also, who reads blogs these days, right?
Who reads documentation?
Manual.
You have to search for something. You have to have something in mind to go and search for it. So I've been thinking about, blogging and, how I'm going to revamp that. And I've decided blogging's not the way to go. So something that I'm considering doing later this year is starting my own YouTube channel where I'm going to cover little projects like this. So short form stuff where it doesn't go into excruciating detail how to do something, but gives you enough of a clue about how it was done and enough supplementary links in description that you can go off and recreate some of these things for yourself. And we also talked about distros and how do I stay on top with distros. I'm thinking of, part of that is looking at the other distros and giving my impressions of distributions that I'm looking at in order to evaluate what they're doing well and what I might want to, integrate into Ubuntu Mate. So yeah, am I a gamer? I had an argument with Popey in a bar in Budapest where I said, I'm only a casual gamer. I don't really play games all that much. And then Popey went, hang on a minute. Have you got a gaming mouse? Yes. Have you got a mouse bungee? Yes. Have you got a mechanical keyboard? Yes. Have you got an external GPU connected over Thunderbolt? Yes. Have you got two of those? Yes. Have you got a separate audio interface? Yes. Have you got a left-handed specially adapted gaming keypad? Yes. He said, are you a gamer? Yes. So the problem is that it sounds, and also the other thing he says, have you got steering wheel and pedals? And it was like, yes. So the thing is that I'm not a hardcore gamer. I am the guy that turns up at the tennis club or the golf range and they've got all the kit. I'm that guy for Linux gaming. I've got all the gear and no idea.
It's all brand new, no grass stains on any of it. Yeah,
all pristine. Yeah, so yeah, I've got all the toys, but I very rarely put them to good use.
Gotcha.
Cool. So with Marte, how can your average user get involved in supporting you guys? I mean, apart from the obvious, become a Patreon, donate, and that sort of thing. What sort of areas do you need help with?
So one of the most valuable things people can do is if they find a bug, actually file the bug. You know, don't post it on Twitter. Don't whine about it on Reddit. I don't read Reddit. I'm not going to find your complaints there. You know, don't post about it on the Ubuntu forum. I don't read the Ubuntu forum. I'm not going to find it there either. Just file a bug. You know, it doesn't matter if it's in the right place. We've got a link to the Launchpad issue tracker for Ubuntu Marte, the whole thing. If you file it there, we'll categorize it correctly. Just file a bug, because if we don't know that these issues exist, then they're not going to get fixed. You know, I get people on Facebook. I post various things on Facebook, and like this one guy posts, is the Lenovo issue fixed? And I'm thinking,
Sure.
What Lenovo issue? The Lenovo issue in your head? Because I don't know about this. So, file bugs, something everyone can do, and it's part of the social contract of you know, open source and all the rest of it. You know, you get an operating system for free. In return, you find a way to help improve it, and the simplest thing you can file bugs. For people that are a bit more engaged, then always do with more people in QA. We talked about this boot of how we're going to do releases and testing weeks. Totally, there's going to be good space for people to come on board, not just with Ubuntu Marte, but any of the Ubuntu flavors, to really help with, you know, testing and identifying issues.
One of the biggest problems I have with a bug is 99 times out of 100, unless it's a biggie, I can't reproduce it. So I can't physically say what I was doing when it happened, because I'm flashing away and I'm doing this, that, and the other, and all of a sudden it goes, was that this or was that that? How
so you're talking,
is it that it's really accurate?
So you're talking about when a port pops up and says something crashed and I want to, well, those are valuable too, right? Just submit those, because those have back traces attached to them. Right. And people like myself can dig into that and actually go and look at what the application was doing at the time and try and figure out where the problem is. So those are useful, because you get enough of those, you start to see patterns, and it helps you identify where the problem might be. And then we can figure out how to reproduce it. But as you say, the most valuable bugs are, right, I do this, this, and this, and it crashes, or it does this, and the thing that it does is not the right thing. You know, those reproducible test cases are by far and away the best, because if we've got a simple thing, steps we can follow, and it goes wrong, then those are great ones that are going to get fixed. But the other thing is that issue trackers are not technical support forums. So, you know, you get people coming in there and they've got this long, flowery prose about, you know, they installed this application and then they changed that and then they wanted to do that. And it's just like technical support. And that is not what bug trackers are for. Those will just get closed. I'm very sorry. We'll say this is not a support forum, you know, raise issues, but it's not. Go to the community. If you've got general inquiries about how to use something, go to that community's site. You know, we have ubuntumarte.community. You go there, there's hundreds of helpful people there who will listen to your, you know, what you're trying to do and help navigate that and help get you working. But issue trackers are, this thing is broken, this is how it's broken, and, you know, we try and figure out how to fix it.
Cool.
Gotcha.
Now, another way, I'm a mere mortal. I only do one language. But there are apparently people out there who can read and write and speak multiple languages, but they may not be software developers and what have you. Now, for those people, translations are a fantastic way to contribute to any open source project, not just, you know, Ubuntu Marte. And to give you some idea, that is by far and away the most popular way to contribute to open source. We've got over 1,200 people working on translations for Marte and Ubuntu Marte desktop.
Wow.
now, and you get different levels of how your translation works. I just want to do a single string, or you get reviewers who other people do the translations and they go in and actually validate that, it's grammatically correct and what have you. So translations are really valuable. Of course, developers, right? So, developers for Marte itself, in core Marte. But what I would be really interested in seeing is we're now getting to the point where Marte's grown in popularity enough. We're seeing people creating third-party plugins and extensions. And I'd love to see more of that, more people building out on Marte itself. And then with those with creative flair, themes, creating new themes or improving the themes that already exist. The skills that you need there is understanding CSS. So anyone familiar with web development can go to any GTK3 theme now and feel immediately at home, because it's just style classes. Or artwork, icons. I mean, it's very rare that you find a developer that's a competent graphics artist. I think Daniel Foray's an exception there. We don't have those skills by and large, and anyone that turns up and can offer decent design skills is always going to be welcomed into any project. So, those are ways that people who are not software developers, can get involved, definitely. And there's probably others as well. In fact, long overdue, I've got a page that I've been writing all of the ways you can contribute. And it's basically that, but we'll be putting it on the site soon with some links to projects where they can jump off and get involved.
Nice.
Excellent.
So just the last question for this interview, I was just curious about the future of Ubuntu Mate, and is there anything that's coming, in the long term, like 1810 or something like that, of Ubuntu Mate that you're excited for and can't wait to tell people?
Yeah. So I think 1810, Ubuntu Mate 1810 is going to be a real yawner, because we're going to do something a bit different.
Okay. Wow, way to get people excited.
And I think people are going to like this, though. This is why they're going to get excited. We were really slow to deal with supporting Ubuntu Mate 1604 and addressing bugs and things that existed in 1604. So I'm going to dedicate the majority of the 1810 cycle in actually doing bug fixes and what are called SRUs for the 1804 release, so that in that initial 6-month period, we try, because I know there are some issues we need to fix and we haven't had time to do them for GA. So over the next 6 months, we're going to be working on tweaking up some things we didn't get time to finish, and that, we know that there are bugs there, and we're just going to really improve that thing so that by the time you get to 1804.1 and by the time that 1810 comes along, it should be, in really good shape. So that's something that I think people who are LTS users should be excited for, that we're going to make a commitment to really, support that version far better than we did with 1604. And I think part of the reason for that is that I really think that this 1804 release is really good, and we really need to actually back it up this time. Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of other stuff we're going to be working on, there's an initiative that I've been helping with called Ayatana Indicators. We use the Ubuntu indicators in Ubuntu Mate 1804. Ayatana Indicators take that code and effectively re-establish themselves as the new upstream. So Mike Gabriel, the Debian developer who I work closely with, is spearheading this. And we're also working with other desktop environment projects, so that this is going to not just be a Mate thing. It's not just going to be an Ubuntu thing. It's going to be a cross-distro, cross-desktop implementation of indicators. Nice. And I'm really looking forward to that work. I think that will be something, as GTK removes this capability, we're going to step in and provide a solution there. And then the other thing, and this isn't going to happen for 1810, but we're just starting to flesh out our roadmap to how we get to Wayland. So that will be a multi-year journey, I'm sure. I don't think there is any time pressure to jump on board with Wayland right now. I don't think that you necessarily miss anything by being on Wayland versus Xorg, I can't see that that's going to change in the short term. High DPI was a far higher priority, in my opinion, but we'll start working towards that. There are rumors of adding Vulkan rendering to Marco, the window manager. So that could be good fun. As I mentioned earlier, Ubuntu Mate Welcome and the Software Boutique, there are actually branches that are moving in new directions for both of those. So you can expect to see those being overhauled and revamped. And the great thing is that both of those are snaps in 1804. So as we drive forwards with the changes there, you will automatically start to see those popping up. So you don't have to subscribe to PPAs. You don't have to wait for the next release. As we feel it's ready, you'll just get the new crack on your desktop. And Ubuntu Mate Welcome is the central part of our USP. So we're going to be working really hard on that. We've decoupled its development from the release development and release distribution. So we can iterate on that at our own pace now and deliver the new features we want to deliver when we want to do it. So I'm looking forward to that. We're going to work. We've got some better developer documentation. We're taking a leaf out of Elementary's book there in creating a better developer story to help people who want to contribute find their way there. I want to steal the audio output switching wizard from Unity 7 and get that into the Mate desktop. So when you plug in headphones or, combo thing, it automatically prompts you and says, what device did you plug in and which do you want to use? And then another project I'm going to be working on is Debian Buster. So Debian 10 Buster is due for release probably next year. Yeah. You can never quite tell with Debian, but let's say sort of June, July next year. I've been asked to work with I already work with the Debian Mate team, but they've specifically asked me to bring some of the refinement and the defaults that we have in Ubuntu Mate, not necessarily the theming, but the way we integrate things, and bring that to the Debian Mate experience. So when they release their Mate on Debian, they have some of that smoothness and, just sane setup and, a little bit more, considered approach. So that's something I've already started working on. I did a bunch of work in January on that, and I shall be doing some more throughout the next 6 months or so.
We're putting some of that upstream to Debian. Would that make it easier to utilize it in Ubuntu Mate as well? Yeah,
so I do, in terms of the Mate packaging, probably 95% of that happens in Debian first. So everything that you see for Mate, for Ubuntu Mate, happens in Debian, and we sync to Ubuntu. And I've already made some changes so that, like the settings and branding overlays that we have in Ubuntu Mate, I've already put all of that into Debian, and I've got this hierarchical overlay system. So most of the Ubuntu Mate branding is now in Debian, but it only applies when it's running on Ubuntu. So there's this distinction of like, here's a common set of stuff that both inherit, and then here's an overlay for Debian and here's an overlay for Ubuntu. And each of those overlays are only applied when one's on Debian and the other's on Ubuntu. And I'm going to flesh that out a bit more to mean that they're closer to what we're doing, because they've figured out that, we've already done the hard work in working out what sane defaults and settings and package configuration should be, and they can just, inherit that.
It's always a good thing.
Pretty awesome stuff coming down the road. Well, Martin, we appreciate all the time that you've given us today. It's an extra long episode, but more than that, we appreciate everything that you have done for us, the end user in the Linux world. It's much appreciated, man.
Well, thank you very much. My pleasure. Thank you for having me back on. It's been good fun. Sorry it's a long episode. I guess you'll have to edit that down.
Oh, no. We're not going to edit a minute out.
Oh, really? Oh, I really apologize. Any listeners? Oh, well done.
I think the best part is that in the beginning, you had the record for the most views, most watched thing, and Ike had the record for the longest one. I think you took that too.
You just took that from Mikey.
That's it.
Triumphant. In your face again, Ike Doherty.
Well, if you want to find out more, you can go to ubuntu-mate.org and give them some love. No matter which way you do it, whether it's money, whether it's support, time, bug tracking, anything that you can do, all of it is much appreciated.
Totally is.
All right, so we want to thank everyone for watching and listening. And if you could give us a rating in your favorite podcast app, we would much appreciate that, because that would allow us to get to more people. So everybody have a great week. And remember, the journey itself is just as important as the destination.
Real men don't read user manuals. Thanks.
Naturally.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Destination Linux Podcast.
I don't know if you might have talked to him through Telegram, but Brian, another host.
I'm Ryan. I'm the one. We talked briefly. DOS Geek. Yep.
I am aware.
And
that's supposed to be, man.
that's comforting.
I'm aware who you are.
I'm aware.
Jack in the box.
This is going to be a good show.
My name is Martin Wimpress, and I know who Ryan is.
Wow.
That's as exciting as I would hoped it would be for him to say that, and we're going to find out why later.
And my name is Zebedee, and I also know who Ryan is.
My name is Michael, and Ryan, who?
Oh, real nice.
Who
Real
are we
nice.
talking about?
Classy.
That is in that one shoe.
I wish.
Ready?
Yeah.
Welcome to episode... Let me start that over again.
So good.
So good. So professional of a podcast here. My gosh.
3 words in. Amazing.
Wait till we do this live.
Exactly. That's right. I'm on the ball, yo.
Yeah.
When I'm not late.
Talking
When you're
about
not
Michael
late.
sharing, though, for open source, didn't he refuse to send you the overlay template?
He did.
No.
He
No,
did.
he did not. No, he did not.
Well, I don't say he flat out refused. He pushed me off and said that it would be a lot more
It's too
detailed.
complex for you.
Yeah, that's what he said. It was,
The guy who can't get
seven
Mante
layers.
to run on his computer.
There are 70
What he-
layers, and there's smart objects. Do you even know what a smart object is?
what he actually said was he was a little too lazy to make it for us
No.
laymen's, because he is super coder, super
Well,
PSD
Wow.
extraordinaire, and he has to
You
dumb
like-
it down for us losers. So.
That's not at all what I said.
What is this rag on
Possibly what I
Michael?
implied, but it's not what I said.
Don't ever.
it's what he implied, but
No, it's just no.
Sorry, it just came to me. I didn't mean to start a battle.
There's a reason
Yes, you
why
did.
it's not being used. Okay, so
Girls, moving on.
All right.
girls.
Rocco says he's added a load of questions.
What's girls?
Okay, so he did. He called us girls, dude. Martin asked
get their phone out.
to get your camera out, will you?
Oh, Rocco, I forgot to mention, I don't want this to start anything, but
Oh, here we go.
the installer I did, it's out there for everyone to use.
Yeah, it's open source, right?
Yeah.
Anybody, I can just go and download it right now, and it will help me.
Well, I know that I trust and believe everyone here's intelligence and ability to use the products as an equal of me. So,
Right.
yeah, absolutely.
Well, you didn't actually have a choice in that because the previous one who originally created it released it as open source, and your license required you to do it. So you're welcome. See ya.
I don't like that. We will destroy them. We will crush them. We will take over their empire.
Read the manual, will you?
And we will make them read the manual.